BK Academy of Chess presents a Monsterous Swindle, a stunning example of using active play to save a lost position, as conducted by the British grandmaster Tony Miles, an accomplished swindler. It comes from the game Miles vs. Short, London 1980. Okay, so what do we have here? Miles is 2 pawns down, and to make matters worse his knight is pinned to his queen, and it's black's move. Many players would resign here, but not Miles. His will to overcome results in a monstrous swindle, as noted in the book, Tony Miles, It's Only Me. After g6, how should white play? Pause the video to find a move for white. When all hope seems lost, examine the most force moves. Checks, captures, and attacks on pieces. International master Simon Webb notes in his book, Chess for Tigers, that when in a losing position, you cannot passively wait for your opponent to squeeze you to death. To stand a chance of pulling off a successful swindle, it is important to get the initiative, and this may involve sacrificing a pawn or two, or even the exchange, to activate your pieces. So what do you think? If you chose rook takes d4, pat yourself on the back, because this is the move that chess program Fritz recommends. However, this is not the move that white played. Along with examining the most forced moves, there are other considerations, such as thinking from the end. For example, in this position, white could draw with perpetual checks, if the queen could get to e8. Right? By using e8 and f7 squares, that's thinking from the end. But is this possible? Are there any other resources for white to work with? Miles uses his 2-to-1 queenside pawn majority to swindle short by playing b6, a move that cannot be ignored because of the threat b7, trapping the bishop and one step away from promoting. But there's more to this move than that meets the eye. Grandmaster John Nunn notes that when in a bad position, one must decide between two strategies, which he calls grim defense and create confusion. Grim defense involves finding some way to hang on, often by liquidating to an ending. Create confusion entails trying to gain the initiative, even at material cost, hoping to stir up complications and cause the opponent to go wrong. As you can see, this move creates confusion, leaving black many options to consider. Which of the following moves should black play? A takes b6, queen takes b6, bishop takes e3, rook takes e3, or none of the above? Hartston and Rubin write that now, rook takes e3, or queen takes b6, add to black's gains with no problems. However, black played a takes b6, and white reveals his intentions with queen a4, and now the queen has access to e8. However, black nips this in the bud with rook f8. So did white gain any compensation for the pawn sacrifice? Well, now the game is wide open, and white has a passed pawn 2 steps away from promoting. Now how should white continue? Notice white's hanging knight. Miles moves his knight out of the line of fire with knight c2, attacking one of black's most important defenders, because if white could take over the a1, h8 diagonal with its queen, it would be game over. However, black is not ready to give up the diagonal and plays bishop g7, protecting the rook and now supported by the king. All seems secure for black. So how should white continue? Miles simply defends by securing the squares around its king, gaining control of the back rank while keeping an eye on black's c and b pawn by controlling the squares in front of the pawns, meanwhile, threatening to promote its pawn. Now, is all this possible? It's not easy, but if white can hold the position, and keep the fire on the board, especially its queen, black will have a tough time converting its advantage. Then, in order to win, black will have to push its king side pawns, thereby exposing its king to stalemating possibilities, especially the threat of perpetual checks. So the game continued with queen b3, overprotecting the b2 square, maintaining control of the squares in front of the pawns, and connecting the queen with the bishop along the diagonal, making it difficult for black to find a way to exchange pieces. Black plays bishop c6, looking to get its light squared bishop in on the attack. White covers the back rank with rook d1, and black doubles up on the a1, h8 diagonal with queen e5, while preparing to advance its c-pawn. and white finds time to play a7, threatening to promote, keeping black's offensive somewhat at bay by having to maintain control of the a8 square. Black gets it light squared bishop into the attack with bishop a4. So why is black sacrificing the bishop? If white takes the bishop, it's lights out. Right? So the queen sidesteps the bishop with queen a3, placing the queen on the same file as its pawn, keeping an eye on the unprized bishop, aiming at black's rook while maintaining control of the a1 and b2 squares next to the king. Black removes its rook out of the scope of white's queen, and hits white hard with rook c8, attacking white's bishop with an X-ray attack on the knight while maintaining control of a8. Notice how white has been maintaining the position without allowing exchanges. Now white amazingly continues its stymied defense by finding what move. This is a good time to pause the video to see if you can find the move that holds everything together without allowing an exchange. White finds knight e3, removing the knight from the bishop and rook attack, and to guard the bishop while blocking the pawn from advancing, holding everything together. However, this leaves the rook hanging. So what is white up to? How come black cannot take the rook? Taking the rook allows white to promote the pawn. Right? The game continued with queen a5, rook c1, and black finally decides to start pushing the kingside pawns with h5, so now white has the added pressure from black's kingside pawn storm. What to do? But this is just what white was waiting for. Remember white's plan? To hold the position until black opens up. Right? So, is now the right time, or should white wait? White has been holding the position long enough. It's time for white to go on the offensive, and white strikes with bishop d5, attacking the e-pawn, with a discovery attack on black's rook, but most importantly threatening to promote the pawn. Black exchanges rooks with rook takes c1. Now how should white take the rook, with the queen or king? Pause. Okay. Let's continue. Taking with the king leads to mate in 2, starting with queen e1. So white continues with queen takes c1, and black gets rid of the a-pawn with queen takes a7. Now that white is on the offensive, how does white maintain its initiative? White strikes at black's weak back rank with queen c8, forcing king h7. But now comes the critical test for white to maintain its initiative. How does white pass the test? Checking with queen g8 is not the answer, because after king h6, white's attack dies out. White has something much stronger. How can white bring the knight into the attack? White plays knight f5, offering a piece sacrifice with the threat to mate with queen g8. So can black take the knight? Give yourself some time by pausing the video. Taking the knight with g takes f5 leads to queen takes f5, forcing king h6, right? Because king h8 obviously leads to mate. So how does white save the day? With queen f4, drawing with perpetual checks. And what happens if black tries king g6? Then black walks away from the game with a full point after bishop takes e4, checkmate. So after knight f5, what move does black find to maintain its advantage? In other words, how can black block white's threat to mate with queen g8? Black blocks the queen with bishop e8, the only way to continue the game. Now can white safely take the bishop? By blocking with the bishop, what is black now threatening? Well, let's see. Queen takes e8 allows for queen a1, king c2, queen c3, king d1, queen d3, forking the king and bishop, enough to win the game. So after bishop e8, white takes the other bishop with knight takes g7, and the game continues with queen d7, queen takes e8, queen takes d5, knight e6, queen b3, king c1, queen c3, king d1, queen f6. Black still hopes to mobilize his pawns and play for the win. However, how does Miles now force a draw? How can black sacrifice its knight to draw by perpetual check? Black played knight g5, forking the king and pawn, thereby forcing queen takes g5. Otherwise knight takes e4, would draw easily. Right? So the game ended with queen f7, king h8, queen f8, king h7, and white draws by perpetual check. What an amazing and complicated endgame. And remember guys, in a losing position, you cannot passively wait. To stand a chance of pulling off a successful swindle, gaining the initiative is a must, which may cost sacrificing some material. I hope you enjoyed this video and thanks for tuning into BK Academy of Chess, where together we build, and over the board we even the score.